The first time you realized you were wealthy, you were not signing papers for a beach house. You were not choosing between two luxury cars. You were standing in a hardware store, arguing with yourself over a $9 sink part. Your financial life had changed enough that a private banker had your number. A real estate broker was texting you about a property you could actually afford. And an old friend had just sent you a photo of a watch that cost more than your first car. But there you were, holding a tiny plastic part under fluorescent lights, thinking, I could pay someone to fix this in one phone call. Then a stranger behind you looked at your old sneakers, your faded jacket, the part in your hand, and probably saw a normal guy trying to save $9. He had no idea you were having one of the most important financial moments of your life. Because this is the part nobody tells you about getting rich. The dangerous moment is not when you cannot afford luxury. It is when you finally can. And suddenly, every ordinary choice starts to feel like an insult to your success. Stay with this story, because by the end, you will know the 3 traps that make wealthy people keep spending for approval, the one question that exposes whether a purchase is freedom or performance, and why the richest upgrade in your life may be the one nobody can photograph. This is not a story about hating nice things. It is about becoming wealthy without letting wealth turn into a costume you have to keep paying for. To understand how you got to that hardware store, we have to go back 3 years, before the $1 million dashboard, before the private banker, before the quiet confidence. Back when every raise still came with a little voice saying, "Prove it." Chapter 1. The Quiet Morning. 3 years earlier, you would have called that hardware store moment embarrassing. Back then, you had a rule you never admitted out loud. If your income rose, your life had to rise with it. A better apartment after the promotion. A better watch after the bonus. A better restaurant after the raise. You told yourself these were rewards, and some were. But rewards are dangerous when they become a costume you are afraid to take off. You worked in cybersecurity for a medical software company in Raleigh. At work, you could see a vulnerability coming from 3 moves away. At home, you could not see how every upgrade quietly created a new minimum standard for your life. Your apartment had the clean look of a person trying to convince yourself you were doing fine. The couch was expensive enough to mention if someone asked. The kitchen had gadgets you used twice. The closet had shoes for versions of yourself you rarely became. You were not broke. That made the problem harder to notice. The first big shift did not come from a spreadsheet. It came from dinner. A vendor invited you and your team to a downtown restaurant where the lighting was low, the plates were tiny, and the server described butter as if it had a biography. You enjoyed it. The room felt important. Everyone spoke a little softer, as if wealth had its own indoor voice. Across the table sat Daniel, a senior engineer who had made serious money from a previous startup. Daniel wore a faded navy sweater, drove an old Subaru, and had the relaxed posture of someone who did not need the room to recognize him. One of the sales guys teased him, "Daniel, man, you could buy this place. Why do you still dress like you were going to fix a printer?" Daniel smiled and said, "Because I like my money more when it is still mine." The table laughed, but you did not. You felt the sentence land somewhere uncomfortable. On the ride home, you realized you had confused wealth with permission to spend. Daniel treated wealth as permission to stop performing. That was a completely different game. Here is the first idea. Luxury spending is not the opposite of wealth. Sometimes it is the receipt for insecurity. Not always. There are people who genuinely love design, travel, art, cars, watches, and beautiful rooms. Wanting nice things is not a moral failure. But when the purchase is really a signal, the signal has to be renewed. That is how a person can earn more and still feel behind. You did not decide to become frugal that night. You decided to become harder to impress. Chapter 2. The Trophy Tax. The next month, you received a promotion. Your base salary moved from $140,000 to $175,000. There was also a performance bonus that could land around $30,000 before taxes if the company hit its targets. Your first instinct was automatic: upgrade the car. You had been driving a paid-off sedan with 130,000 miles. It had 2 scratches on the bumper and a cup holder that only worked if you negotiated with it. The car was reliable, but it did not match the new title in your email signature. That was the thought. Not that the car failed you, that it failed the story. On a Saturday morning, you walked into a dealership and test drove a new sport utility vehicle. The salesman talked about safety, technology, resale value, and how people in your line of work deserved comfort. You liked the quiet cabin, the heavy doors, and the image of yourself pulling into the office garage with it. Then you saw the payment. $780 a month. Before insurance changes, before higher registration, before the small, expensive things nobody puts in the commercial. The number was not impossible. That was the trap. It was affordable in the narrow sense. It was also a permanent invitation for your future self to have less room. Experian reported that in the first quarter of 2026, the average new car payment was $770 a month, while the average used car payment was $531. Those are averages, not commandments. But you stared at your quote and understood something simple. Normal can still be expensive. The salesman waited. You asked for the printed offer, folded it once, and put it in your jacket pocket. I need to think, you said. On the way home, you sat in your old car and did the math. $780 a month was $9,360 a year. Over 5 years, $46,800 before the other costs. If you invested that same payment instead, the exact result would depend on returns, timing, taxes, and fees. But the direction was obvious. One path bought a fading feeling. The other bought flexibility. This was when you started calling it the trophy tax. The trophy tax is the extra money you pay because a purchase has to answer a social question. Do I look successful enough? Do I belong in this room? Am I behind people my age? Did all the work finally mean something? The danger is not the object. The danger is outsourcing the answer. A car can be useful. A watch can be art. A beautiful home can create peace. But if the purchase is trying to silence a question inside you, the silence usually expires. You drove home without the sport utility vehicle. You did not feel heroic. You felt annoyed. Part of you wanted the easier story. The story where discipline feels noble from the first minute. It did not. It felt like leaving a party early while everyone else was still laughing. That night, you transferred the amount of the proposed payment into a separate investment account and named the transfer Quiet Wealth. You did not choose that name for branding. You chose it because the money did not need applause to become powerful. Chapter 3. The room changed. 6 months later, your net worth crossed $1 million. Not $1 million in cash, not a cartoon vault. A mix of retirement accounts, brokerage investments, home equity in a modest townhouse, cash reserves, and company stock that had vested over time. Some of it could move quickly, some of it could not. Some of it was exposed to market swings. It was real, but it was not all spendable in the same way. That distinction mattered to you. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances reported that in 2022, the median family net worth in the United States was about $192,900, while the mean was about $1,063,700. The big gap between median and mean tells a story. Averages get pulled upward by very wealthy households. The typical family and the average dollar live in different neighborhoods. You knew crossing 7 figures did not make you untouchable. It made you responsible for not becoming foolish because a dashboard looked flattering. Still, the room changed. People found out in small ways. Not the exact number, but the category. A coworker noticed your options. A friend heard about a small rental property. Your sister joked that you were the family money person now. Suddenly, invitations arrived with assumptions inside them. A ski trip where the group house cost more for 1 week than your old rent. A bachelor weekend where nobody wanted to be the person asking why bottle service was necessary. A charity gala table where the ticket was described as not that bad if you think of it as networking. You could afford these things. That made declining them more revealing. At first, you gave practical excuses. Busy that weekend. Work is wild. Already committed. But the real reason was harder. You no longer wanted your calendar to be a proof of wealth subscription. One Friday, your friend Blake invited you to a luxury watch event at a hotel bar. Blake was generous, funny, and under a pressure you recognized. Every visible upgrade seemed to calm him for a few days. You have to come, Blake said. They are bringing pieces you cannot even get retail. You almost said yes, not because you wanted a watch, because saying no felt like stepping out of a tribe. Instead, you asked, do you actually want one, or do you want to be seen being offered one? There was a pause long enough to make the friendship wobble. Blake laughed it off, but you could hear the sting. Later that night, Blake texted, "Brutal question, but fair." This was the second shift. You realized luxury spending often works because it offers community. The room, the event, the table, the trip, the brand vocabulary. When you stop participating, you do not just save money. You risk losing a version of belonging. That is why telling people to simply stop spending misses the human problem. Spending is often social glue. If you remove it, you need something better to hold your life together. You started building that something slowly. Saturday hikes instead of expensive brunches. Dinner at home where everyone brought one dish. Basketball at the park with coworkers. A monthly money dinner where the rule was honesty, not bragging. The surprise was not that cheaper plans saved money. It was that they revealed who actually wanted you and who mostly wanted the spending environment around you. Chapter 4. The millionaire who still compared prices. The first person to challenge you directly was your mother. She watched you compare prices on dish soap during a family grocery run and shook her head. "You have money now. Why are you still doing that?" You did not answer right away. The old answer would have sounded defensive. Because prices matter. Because waste is bad. Because small things add up. All true, but incomplete. Finally, you said, "Because I do not want my brain to lose contact with ordinary numbers." There is a strange drift when your income rises. A meal becomes just a meal, even at $80. A repeating fee becomes invisible. At some point, you stop asking whether the purchase is useful and start asking whether it is noticeable enough to think about. That is not abundance. That is numbness. The Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey for 2024 showed how ordinary household spending breaks down in America. Housing took about 33.4% of annual expenditures, transportation about 17%, food about 12.9%, and apparel and services about 2.5%. The exact shape changes by household, city, income, and family size. But the lesson is clear. Wealth is not protected by obsessing over every tiny item. It is protected by staying awake around the big recurring categories while refusing to let the small ones train you into carelessness. You still compared dish soap, but you did not pretend dish soap would make or break your future. It was practice. A small reminder that money was real, not just numbers glowing on a screen. Your personal rule became this: be relaxed about cheap mistakes, rigorous about permanent expenses, and honest about emotional purchases. Cheap mistakes were things like ordering the wrong lunch or overpaying for parking once. Permanent expenses were car payments, housing costs, subscriptions, vacation habits, and anything that quietly turned into a fixed identity. Emotional purchases were the interesting ones. What mattered was whether you were buying the object or buying relief. This rule made you less anxious, not more. Before, your spending choices lived in fog. You either said yes and felt guilty, or said no and felt deprived. Now you had categories. A category turns shame into a decision. One Saturday, you bought an expensive chef's knife after thinking about it for 3 months. You cooked almost every day. The knife made daily life better. You did not buy the matching set. You did not need the story of being a serious kitchen person. You needed one tool that would be used. That purchase taught you another rule. Wealthy people do not have to buy the whole identity. They can buy the part that is useful. Chapter 5. The flex was saying no. The hardest no came at work. A new executive joined your company and wanted to create a special security innovation group. The role would come with a title bump, more visibility, and a compensation package that looked impressive on paper. The catch was travel. 2 weeks a month, board presentations, client dinners, a schedule that would make your life look prestigious from the outside and hollow from the inside. 3 years earlier, you would have accepted before the email finished loading. Now you asked for time. At home, you opened a blank page and wrote 2 columns. In the first column, money, status, title, optionality. In the second, sleep, health, relationship with your niece, calm mornings, the small rental project, the volunteer program where you taught basic cybersecurity to community college students. Then you wrote 1 sentence under both columns. What does this opportunity cost if I pay for it with my attention? This is where your view of wealth became sharper. Wealth was not the ability to say yes to every expensive thing. Wealth was the ability to protect your best hours from things that only looked impressive. You met with the executive and asked direct questions about travel, control, support, and decision authority. The answers were polished but vague. You declined. People were confused. Blake called you insane, a coworker said. Must be nice to be able to leave money on the table. You did not argue. The coworker was partly right. It was nice. That was the point of becoming wealthy. But leaving money on the table only feels foolish if money is the only thing on the table. This is the third idea. Not every high earner should turn down promotions. Some people need the money. Some people love the challenge. Some roles create skills and relationships that compound. The point is to price the yes correctly. A better title can be valuable. But if it requires you to finance a more expensive lifestyle, neglect your health, and become unavailable to the people you claim you are working for, the raise may be smaller than it looks. You started using a decision rule you called the second invoice. The first invoice is the price everyone sees, the payment, the purchase price, the salary number, the bonus, the fee. The second invoice is what the decision charges your life later: time, maintenance, stress, identity pressure, lost options, relationship strain. Luxury spending often hides its second invoice beautifully. A bigger house has rooms, but also cleaning, furnishing, taxes, repairs, and pressure to match the square footage. A higher status car has comfort, but also insurance, depreciation, and the feeling that your next car cannot be worse. A luxury vacation can create memories, but if it becomes the only way your family rests, rest itself becomes expensive. You were not anti-luxury, you were anti-unpriced commitment. You could enjoy nice things without letting them recruit your future. Chapter 6. The Party Test. The emotional climax came at a housewarming party. Blake had bought a large house outside Charlotte. It was beautiful. Tall windows, outdoor kitchen, hidden sound system, a garage cleaner than most living rooms. Blake gave tours with the nervous energy of a man asking the house to speak for him. You were happy for him, truly. Envy had softened over the years because you no longer treated other people's purchases as instructions. But halfway through the night, Blake pulled you into the garage. Tell me the truth, he said. Did I overdo it? You looked at the polished floor, the new sport utility vehicle, the storage racks already full of things that looked recently purchased and rarely touched. Do you want comfort, you asked? Or do you want witnesses? Blake leaned against the wall. For a moment, the whole party seemed to dim behind the door. I thought once I could afford it, I would stop feeling like I had to prove I belonged, Blake said. But it got worse. Now I am proving I can afford what I already bought. That sentence stayed with you. Because this is the part people rarely say out loud. Luxury can become a treadmill precisely because you can afford the first step. The problem is not buying one nice thing. The problem is that visible upgrades create an audience, and audiences expect continuity. If you become the watch person, the next watch has to make sense. If you become the resort person, the next vacation cannot look too ordinary. If you become the luxury car person, practical transportation begins to feel like personal decline. You told Blake something you had never said so plainly. The goal is not to look rich forever. The goal is to become free enough that looking rich feels optional. Blake did not sell the house the next day. Real life is not that tidy. But he stopped adding to it. He canceled an outdoor renovation planned mainly for parties and started renting the basement suite to a traveling nurse. He kept the house, but changed its job. It was no longer a trophy. It had to become an asset, or at least stop becoming a bigger liability. You learned something from that, too. The answer is not always to undo a decision. Sometimes the mature move is to change the relationship with it. This matters because shame is a terrible financial advisor. Shame says, you were stupid, burn it all down. Wisdom says, what is the cleanest next decision from here? A person can wake up inside an expensive life and still begin. Renegotiate one contract, sell one vehicle, cancel one status habit. Use one room differently, tell one friend the truth. Move one recurring payment from performance to ownership. That is not dramatic. It is how a life turns. Chapter 7. The Invisible Upgrade. A year after you declined the executive role, your wealth had grown again. Not explosively, quietly. Market gains helped, automatic investing helped, rental income helped a little, though repairs ate more of it than people admit. Your paid-off car kept running. Your townhouse appreciated, but you did not treat paper equity like spending money. The biggest change was not in your accounts. It was in your nervous system. You stopped checking your net worth every morning. You stopped needing purchases to mark transitions. You stopped feeling embarrassed when someone else spent more. You could sit in a nice hotel lobby and enjoy it without needing to belong to it. That was the invisible upgrade. The Federal Reserve's 2024 Household Well-Being Report found that 63% of adults said they could cover a $400 emergency expense with cash or its equivalent. That means many households still face real fragility, and it would be insulting to say money stress is just mindset. It is not. Wages, rent, medical costs, family obligations, geography, and bad luck all matter. But your story was not about pretending structural problems do not exist. It was about what happens after you have some margin and still feel chased. At a certain point, the question changes from how do I survive to why do I still feel owned? For you, the answer was that you had allowed other people to define the evidence of success. Once you took that evidence back, wealth became quieter and more useful. You upgraded things that reduced friction. A better mattress, a reliable laptop, dental work you had postponed, flights at humane hours, therapy after your father got sick, a house cleaner twice a month during a brutal work season. None of it looked like a music video. All of it gave your life back to you. This is where the word luxury gets interesting. For someone exhausted, luxury might be sleep. For someone with debt, a zero balance. For someone with a chaotic family, a locked door and a quiet Sunday. For someone who grew up unstable, 6 months of expenses in cash. Even if no one applauds it, you did spend. You just spent in the direction of relief, usefulness, and values, not performance. You called it the invisible upgrade because nobody clapped for it. Nobody noticed when you increased your charitable giving. Nobody complimented you for having a paid-off car. Nobody asked where you got the calendar space to take your niece to the science museum on a Thursday afternoon. But your life felt wider. And that is the strange truth. The best parts of wealth often do not photograph well. Chapter 8. The 3 Luxury Traps. By the time you began mentoring younger employees, you had turned your experience into 3 traps you could explain without sounding like a motivational poster. The first trap is arrival spending. Arrival spending is what happens when you buy proof that a painful season was worth it. The new job, the exit, the bonus, the paid-off debt, the first 6-figure year. You want a marker. That is human. The danger is when the marker becomes a new baseline. A celebration should have an ending. A lifestyle does not. Your rule was simple. Celebrate with a purchase that ends, not a payment that follows you home. Take the trip if it fits. Buy the dinner. Replace the broken couch. But be careful with celebrations that create monthly obligations. The monthly obligation will still be there long after the emotional event has passed. The second trap is peer matching. Peer matching is when your financial decisions are quietly benchmarked to people whose full financial picture you cannot see. You see the car, not the loan, the kitchen, not the home equity line, the vacation, not the credit card balance, the business class seat, not the stock grant that made it irrelevant. Or sometimes, you see real wealth and forget that their balance sheet is not your instruction manual. The third trap is identity locking. Identity locking happens when a purchase becomes part of who you are in public. Then downgrading feels like humiliation instead of optimization. You are not changing cars, you are losing face. You are not moving to a smaller house, you are admitting defeat. You are not skipping the trip, you are becoming boring. You taught one question for all 3 traps. Would I still want this if nobody could see it, and if I could never mention it? Not every visible purchase fails that test. You may still want the beautiful car because driving matters to you. You may still want the tailored suit because craftsmanship gives you joy. You may still want the ocean view room because you and your spouse will remember that morning for 20 years. Good. Then own it honestly. But if the desire collapses when the audience disappears, you have learned something before the receipt becomes a chain. This is the part that makes building wealth feel less like deprivation and more like self-respect. You are not banning pleasure. You are refusing to let insecure pleasure write contracts for your future. Chapter 9. The money you did spend. A false version of this story would make you sound like a man who never bought anything fun. You bought good concert tickets for your mother's birthday because she had loved the singer since college. You paid for your sister's certification exam when her job would not reimburse it. You rented a lake house for a small group of friends after Blake's divorce, not because it was fancy, but because everyone needed a place to breathe. You bought the chef's knife. You took one beautiful trip to Japan and stayed longer in fewer cities instead of sprinting through expensive proof. You spent money. You just demanded that money do a real job. That job could be comfort. It could be beauty. It could be memory. It could be time. It could be generosity. It could even be delight. But the job could not be, please convince strangers I am enough. This is the fourth idea. The opposite of luxury spending is not cheapness. It is intentionality. Cheapness asks, how little can I pay? Intentionality asks, what is worth paying for, and what is only asking for my insecurity? Cheapness can make people small. Intentionality can make people free. You had to learn that distinction because you had seen both sides. You had watched people with money become straight and ungenerous, measuring every dinner bill like friendship was a hostile contract. You did not want that. You also watched people with money become trapped by generosity theater, picking up checks they resented because they enjoyed being seen as the person who could. So you built a giving budget, a fun budget, and a no explanation rule. The giving budget meant generosity was planned, not performed. The fun budget meant joy had permission, not guilt. The no explanation rule meant you could decline expenses without presenting a legal defense. No, I am not doing that trip this year. No, I am keeping my car. No, I am not upgrading the house right now. Short sentences became financial protection. One afternoon, a younger coworker named Maya asked how you stayed motivated if you were not chasing visible rewards. You thought about the old car, the declined promotion, Blake in the garage, and your mother in the grocery aisle. Then you said, I am chasing the day my life does not need to audition. Maya wrote that down. Chapter 10. The Final Test. The final test came quietly, as most real tests do. Your company was acquired. Your stock payout was larger than expected. Not life-ending money, but life-changing money if handled carefully. After taxes and planning, you could pay off the remaining mortgage on your townhouse, expand your investments, take a sabbatical, or buy the kind of house that would make everyone stop asking whether you were rich. For 2 weeks, you felt the old temptation return. You browsed listings late at night, modern homes with glass walls, big kitchens, 3-car garages, neighborhoods where the landscaping looked professionally calm. You imagined hosting holidays there. You imagined Blake walking in and whistling. You imagined your family feeling proud. Then you noticed the fantasy had an audience again. So you did what you had learned to do. You priced the second invoice. Higher property taxes. Higher insurance. More furniture. More maintenance. More distance from your sister. More pressure to keep earning at the same intensity. More rooms to fill. More life to manage. The house was not wrong. It was just expensive in ways the listing did not show. Instead, you made a split decision. You paid down part of the mortgage, invested part, set aside cash for a 6-month sabbatical, and created a small fund for family experiences. Then you did something that would have confused your younger self. You fixed the sink. That is where we found you at the beginning, holding a $9 replacement part, wealthy enough to outsource the problem, calm enough not to need to. The point was never the sink. The point was contact. You wanted to remain in contact with effort, with ordinary prices, with the difference between convenience and avoidance, with the fact that a human life can become heavy when every problem is solved by purchasing distance from it. You did hire help when help made sense. But you refused to become helpless in the name of success. That afternoon, after the sink stopped dripping, you sat at the kitchen table and opened your accounts. For the first time in months, you did not look at the total first. You looked at the commitments. What owned your future? The answer was less than before. That was the real number. If you remember one thing from this story, remember this. Becoming wealthy does not automatically make you free. It only gives you the chance to stop renting your identity from other people's expectations. Luxury is not evil. Spending is not failure. Beautiful things can belong in a wise life. But if every raise becomes a payment, every bonus becomes proof, and every room you enter requires a costume, then wealth has not changed your life. It has only upgraded the cage. So here is the decision rule. Before your next major upgrade, ask 3 questions. First, what job will this purchase do after the excitement fades? Second, what second invoice comes with it? Third, would I still choose it if no one could see it? If the answer is clear, enjoy it without apology. If the answer gets quiet, Listen to the quiet. And if you are growing your money right now, do not wait until you are rich to practice this. Practice with the next payment, the next bonus, the next invitation, the next little moment where your ego asks your bank account to speak for it. Comment with one thing you would still buy if nobody could ever know you bought it. That answer will tell you more about your values than any luxury brand ever could. And if this helped you rethink build wealth as freedom instead of performance, subscribe for the next story. You did not become wealthy because you hated spending. You became free because you stopped confusing spending with arrival.